It is late afternoon somewhere in Gaul. The Roman legion has been marching since dawn. 20 miles of road behind them. The men are exhausted, their feet raw, their shoulders aching from the weight of 60-pound packs. The cornicen sounds the halt, and then something extraordinary happens. 6,000 men, who have just completed one of the most grueling physical tasks a human body can perform, immediately begin building a city, not a rough camp, not a huddle of tents in a field. A fortified installation with earthen ramparts, a defensive ditch, watchtowers, a main street, a command headquarters, a hospital, organized barrack areas, a water supply, built to precise engineering specifications, in the same configuration every single time, in under 3 hours. By the time darkness falls, the legion is behind walls. The gates are guarded. The watches are posted. Tomorrow they will march again, and tomorrow evening they will build it all again. This happened every single day on campaign, and it is one of the most remarkable organizational achievements in military history. Today we go inside the Roman marching camp, the Castra. How it was planned before the army arrived, how 6,000 men built it in 3 hours without chaos, what it looked like inside, and why this daily construction was itself a weapon of war. The Roman marching camp did not begin when the army arrived. It began hours earlier, with a small group of specialists moving quietly ahead of the main column. These were the Mensores, the surveyors. Their job was to find the site, assess it, and mark out the entire camp before the first exhausted legionary came into view. The Mensores were trained engineers. They understood terrain, drainage, defensive positioning, and the precise geometric requirements of the Castra. When they arrived at a potential site, they worked through a systematic checklist that Julius documents in detail. First, water. The camp needed a reliable water source within practical distance. A legion of 6,000 men plus support staff consumed enormous quantities of water daily. Without it, the camp could not function for more than a day. Second, ground conditions. The site needed to be flat enough for the internal street grid, but with enough natural slope for drainage. A camp built on waterlogged ground was a health disaster waiting to happen. Third, defensibility. Ideally, 1 or 2 sides of the camp would be protected by natural features. A river, a slope, dense forest. This reduced the length of defensive perimeter the legion had to actively guard through the night. Fourth, fodder. The legion traveled with hundreds of horses, mules, and cattle. Grazing land or stored fodder needed to be accessible. Once the site was selected, the Mensores marked it out using measuring rods, ranging poles, and a groma, the Roman surveying instrument that allowed right angles to be established precisely across rough ground. Every measurement was standardized. The Praetorium command tent always went in the same position. The Via Principalis main street always ran in the same orientation. The gates were always in the same relative positions. Why this obsessive standardization? Because in an army of 6,000 men, speaking multiple languages and dialects, arriving exhausted after a day's march, there was no time to explain where anything was. Every soldier knew exactly where his unit's assigned area was, because it was always in the same place The camp was a map that the soldiers carried in their heads. When the Mensores finished, the site was marked with colored flags and stakes. Each flag indicated a specific zone. The Praetorium, the Via Principalis, the unit areas, the latrines, the horse lines. The army was still miles away, but the camp already existed as a diagram on the ground. When the column arrived at the marked site, the transformation began immediately. There was no rest period. The exhausted soldiers dropped their marching packs and picked up their entrenching tools. Every Roman soldier carried construction equipment as standard kit. The dolabra, a combined pickaxe and adze, could break hard ground, cut roots, and shape timber. The pala was an iron, shod wooden spade for moving earth. A length of rope, stakes, and a wicker basket for carrying excavated soil completed the basic entrenching kit. This equipment added significant weight to the already heavy marching load, but it was non-negotiable. The camp was not built by specialist engineers. It was built by the soldiers themselves. The work was organized by centuries and cohorts, each unit assigned a specific section of the perimeter or a specific internal task. The centurions directed the work exactly as they directed drill and battle, with absolute authority and immediate correction of any deviation from the standard. The first priority was the fossa, the defensive ditch. This ran around the entire perimeter of the camp, typically V-shaped, approximately 3 Roman feet deep and 9 feet wide, though dimensions varied with the threat level. On a quiet march through friendly territory, a smaller ditch sufficed. When the enemy was close, the fossa could be doubled, 2 parallel ditches, and deepened considerably. The earth excavated from the fossa was not wasted. It was piled on the inner edge to form the agger, the rampart. Stakes were driven into the agger's crest, and the pila muralia, the sharpened wooden stakes that every Roman soldier carried, were planted in the top of the rampart to form a palisade. The fossa and agger together created a defensive barrier that could stop a cavalry charge and slow any infantry assault long enough for the defenders to respond. While the perimeter work proceeded, other details were simultaneously laying out the internal street grid, pitching the leather tents in their assigned positions, digging the latrines downwind of the sleeping areas, establishing the horse lines, and setting up the Praetorium command area, where the legatus and his staff would work through the evening. The coordination required to do all of this simultaneously without the work parties interfering with each other was itself a remarkable organizational achievement. It worked because every man knew his role, his position, and his task before he arrived. The standardized layout meant that no decisions needed to be made on site. Execution was everything. Once built, the Roman marching camp was a functioning military installation that reproduced the layout of a permanent fort with impressive fidelity. The Via Principalis was the main street, running the full width of the camp. It was wide enough for troops to march in formation, essential for rapid deployment through the camp gates in an emergency. At its center stood the Praetorium, the commander's tent, and the camp's administrative heart. Here the legatus received reports, issued orders, and conducted the business of command. Around it were the tents of the senior tribunes and the aquilifer who carried the legion's eagle standard. The Via Praetoria ran perpendicular to the Via Principalis, creating the cross-shaped street plan that defined the Castra's interior organization. Unit areas were arranged in blocks on either side of these streets, with each century occupying a standardized plot where their leather tents were pitched in the same configuration every night. The 4 gates, Porta Praetoria, Porta Decumana, and 2 Porta Principales, were more than entrances. They were tactical assets, wide enough for the army to sortie through quickly. They were also the points through which supply convoys entered and patrols departed. Each gate was guarded through the night by a dedicated watch, with the password, the Tessera, changed daily to prevent infiltration. The camp's internal organization reflected the same logic as its external defenses. Eliminate uncertainty, reduce decision time, enable rapid response. A soldier woken at midnight by the alarm knew exactly which gate to move toward, exactly where his sentry would form up, and exactly what his role was. The camp's geography was his training. Modern military historians sometimes describe the Roman marching camp as Rome's most important tactical weapon. This is not an exaggeration. The camp transformed the strategic situation in any theater of operations. An army that can fortify itself every night cannot be surprised. It cannot be destroyed by a dawn attack. It can choose when to fight and when to withdraw, because it always has a defensible position to return to. The enemy, by contrast, must either attack the fortified camp, a difficult and costly proposition, or watch the Roman army operate from a secure base indefinitely. Julius Caesar understood this better than almost anyone. His Gallic campaigns were a masterclass in using the Castra as a strategic tool. When he was outnumbered, he fortified and waited. When his enemies came to him, they came on his terms, against prepared defenses. When he moved knowing that each night's camp erased the vulnerability of the march. The psychological effect on enemy populations was also significant. An army that builds a fortified camp every evening and tears it down every morning sends a clear message. This force is not a raiding party. It is not passing through. It is here, it is organized, and it will be back tomorrow. The Castra was a statement of permanence, even in motion. The morning routine reversed the evening's construction with equal efficiency. At the first trumpet signal, the classicum, the soldiers woke and began striking their tents and packing their equipment. At the second signal, the horses were saddled and the baggage loaded. At the third signal, the column formed up and the march began. But before the army departed, the camp was systematically demolished. The Pila Muralia stakes were pulled from the rampart and repacked. They would be needed tonight. The leather tents were folded and loaded onto the mules. The latrines were filled in and covered. Why the careful demolition? Because a standing empty camp was a liability. It could shelter an enemy force. It could be used as a base for ambush against the departing column. Roman doctrine required that nothing useful be left behind. What remained after the army departed? was a rectangular depression in the earth, the negative space of the fossa, and the compressed ground of the Via Principalis. Archaeologists today find these traces across Europe, from Scotland to Romania, each one the footprint of a single night's occupation by a Roman army on the march. 3 hours every evening, for months at a time. The Roman marching camp was not just an engineering achievement. It was a psychological one. The discipline required to build it, to take exhausted soldiers and immediately set them to heavy physical labor in a specific configuration, to a precise standard, was the same discipline that made the Roman army effective in battle. The camp and the legion were expressions of the same thing, the transformation of individual men into a collective machine that was greater than the sum of its parts. A single Roman soldier was a capable fighter. 6,000 Roman soldiers who could build a fortified city in 3 hours after a 20-mile march were something their enemies had no answer for. The Castra was Rome's signature. Wherever the legions went, the rectangular earthworks followed. And wherever those earthworks appeared, the message was the same: Rome is here. Rome is organized. And Rome is not leaving until it chooses to. 2,000 years later, archaeologists can still find the outlines of these camps pressed into the earth of 3 continents. The most durable monument to the most disciplined army the ancient world ever produced. What aspect of the Roman marching camp surprises you most? Leave a comment below. And if you want to keep exploring what made the Roman army the most effective military force in the ancient world, subscribe. Next video we go inside the Roman military pay system.